Alright, so here's the first part of the answer key. So you should have your foldable out. Remember, if you did not do your homework and complete it, you can complete it later. To tell you the honest truth, you kind of have help here because I'm giving the answer key up here. You can go back and watch the video. But if you do not complete day one's homework, there's no way you can complete day 2, 3, or 4 homework. Why? Every single day is building off the previous day. You are going to today identify correlations off of yesterday's homework. So if you don't have that graph, you can't do the correlation. So make sure that you're paying attention and you're coming back in here later and finishing it up. So, first thing, on day one's homework. Number 1, make sure that you put your title. When I looked at people's, I was checking for their completion score. A lot of you had your graphs done, but you did not have your title or labels. You need to make sure that you do have a title and labels on your graph. So this one is age versus data used. Our y-axis should have been our data used, and our x-axis is the age. Finding scale. Remember, to find scale, you do your largest value minus your smallest value. So on this one for age, we did 65 minus 25 and got 40. And then you divide it by how many lines we have. You look at that number. I'd rather you have your foldable out and you follow along with us. We then divide by 12 and you look at that number and say, what do I want to round it up to? What can I make it for our scale? Your graph, when you graphed it, should have looked similar to this one. I'm going to redo this on mine instead of having the picture because it's kind of dark. But for tomorrow, I'll show you exactly how we look at it. But should have seen your dots for your points similar to this in this trend. On number 2, our title could have been fat versus grams. Y-axis was grams. X-axis was the fat. Here was my scale that we used. It looks like we went up by 3 on our scale. And on this one, we were going up by 33. Look at where your coordinate points. It should have went in this trend, coming up and to the right. On number 3, high school versus grades. Or grads. Grades. 0. And the high school should have been on our X. College grades would have been on the left. Your graph should have looked like this, where it's up and to the right, more up here. Okay. Once again, if you did not finish this, you need to get it done so you can do today's assignment. Okay, for today, what I need us to turn to, we are going to open up our foldable. Did I give you an extra one last time?
Yeah, I'll look that one. I don't even know how.
You're going to have to do it on paper first time. Or we're going to have, is it not glued in your notebook? Yeah, we have to get our notebook. You need to be gluing this, we're not losing it. Right now, get a bunch of these fixed, follow on. Okay. You should have learned that before. That's ready for class. Or get your planner out, I'll mark you. Is it in your locker? Alright. Open up that very first page. Is it in there? Yes, you can do notes with us. I'm going to mark this planner because you're not ready for class. That's what we're supposed to have. Okay, ladies. Okay, day 2, we're going to look at correlations. If you open up that first page, you saw these 4 graphs that we talked on the very first day, that all 4 of these are scatter plots. Each one of them represents a scatter plot. What I want you to do, I'm going to pause our recording, and I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. I want you to turn, talk with your neighbor, and I'm going to give one sucker out to someone that can tell me what they're noticing that's going to get our conversation started. First, you're going to talk to your neighbors. And what do you notice about the four graphs? What's making each graph special? So, turn, talk with your neighbors first. All right. What do we think that we can come up with? What is some kind of relationship going on here? Ainsley.
They're all showing like data and they're plotting information.
Okay, but what makes them special?
Some of them are like rising and falling, and they all have points.
Okay, they all have points. What makes this one special?
It's rising.
Okay, what do you mean rising?
Like the trend line is going up.
Okay, so we'll start with that. We still read our graphs left to right, just like we do with linear graphs. Left to right. So when I look at this one, Ainsley says that's writing. See, do you guys remember when we did just linear lines, what kind of slope we said that was? Positive. So this is what we call a positive. Write this above yours. This is what we call a positive correlation. And that's going to be important to what we're doing because we're going to be asking you guys to identify the correlation. The first one is a positive correlation, which means when X is increasing, Y is also increasing. The very first flat.
Wait.
Are you ready for the next one?
Wait.
So, just like slope, this is telling us a positive correlation. Remember, scatter plots are comparing two sets of data. We're seeing, does one thing affect another? For example, if I wanted to take data to find out, I did this in my last class, if eating waffles every day affects your grade.
No.
So I said, hey, does your waffles intake affect your grade? Do you think, honestly, that the more waffles you eat, your score will get higher?
Yeah,
No, probably not.
Brain damage.
So it probably would not have the effect. If this would have been the graph, though, if this would have been, and this was my grades, and this was waffles, and we looked at this, and I told you, hey, there's a positive correlation between waffles and grades. That would tell you as a mathematician, hey, when I do more waffles and I eat more of those, my grade goes up. Now, that sounds pretty stupid, right?
Yeah.
We don't think that's going to happen.
I actually feared that in my mind. You know how sleep helps stimulate your mind? And then some maybe if you're a person who doesn't eat breakfast every morning and you start eating waffles every morning, then your brain's already like up and you start getting better.
And that's actually, you're actually taking this to the next level with what you're doing. Because in real life, we will start, and then actually 2 days we're going to be doing this. You are actually going to be interpreting and then start asking those questions. Okay, why is there a relationship between this? Because there is some kind of explanation. You're going to see, we'll do an example here in 2 days where when we looked at it first, you're like, whoa, that makes no sense. Why is this making a change? And then we start asking why, and it's because of some outside source we don't know. But that's why we start thinking about this. Let's see if we can get the next one then. So if this one's a positive correlation, X increases, Y increases, what do you think the next graph is?
Negative.
It's a negative correlation. When X is increasing, Y is decreasing. I'm going to skip the third one just for a second. Let's go to the fourth one. Let's go back to our waffles and grades. This is probably one that's a better example of waffles and grades. Do we think my grades are affected by how many waffles I eat?
No.
What is this showing? It's not a positive correlation. It's not a negative correlation.
It's like everybody's different, so it doesn't really matter what waffles.
So that one means
They're all
there is no. So right now we're going to say no correlation. When we have no correlation, it means whatever two pieces of data that we are looking at, they do not relate to each other. One does not affect the other. There is no pattern. Can anyone think of something that probably has no correlation? What would be something that would probably have no correlation?
like people's age versus their favorite colors.
Yeah,
The government shutting.
age versus favorite colors. What do you mean? Okay, but remember we have to be comparing two sets of data. So two sets of data where, like, one up here, like we said, grades. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at everyone's grade in the class. I can make a table and write down what everyone's grade was at the end of the second quarter. And then I want to compare it to another piece of data and say late work. How many late works did you have? I'm going to see, did the amount of late works you have affect what your final grade was?
Yes.
I know
Or
what we're gonna do.
what if I say I want to look at your shoe size? Oh, I want to see if your shoe size affects your grade. Do we think your shoe size will affect your grade? No, so that would be our example of no correlation. Okay? Alright. Let's go to this third one. This one is a little bit special. We're going to call it
Swing grab.
close. Non-linear.
David and Goliath.
Zach.
Yeah.
A nonlinear correlation, it forms a curve. In a day, tomorrow, we're going to be learning about how we can make a line. We talked about last quarter, we did all linear lines. If I look at here, do you see how I could maybe have a line in here?
Yeah.
I could probably have a line in here. I can't make a line in here, right? In this one, can I make a straight line? No.
No.
So we're really going to be focusing on 1, 2, and number 4 for the most part. But it's important we know these. Alright, before we get to today's activity, I want you to turn, actually it's on the bottom part, it's on the vocabulary. We're going to fill this vocabulary out because this is what you're going to do for your homework today. It says gaps. We're going to write gaps refer to missing data. Just like Michael Strahan has that giant gap in his teeth. There's missing teeth there. When we talk about scatter plots, when we talk about gaps,
Wait, is that to do with the
so when we talk about gaps, we're going to look about where are they missing some. And I'm going to show you how. This is today's assignment. Make sure you pay attention. Troy. If I look at this scatter plot, this one's already drawn. And they got the information there. Do you see anywhere where there might be a gap in information? I'll even let you come up. Who can come circle? Where do they think the gap is?
I'm almost back here.
Oh, perfect. Good job. So, if we look, actually, let me ask you the first question. What kind of correlation is this one? It's a negative. First thing we want to do is we're going to say on today's homework, you're going to identify the correlation. So for number 1, you're going to say negative correlation. You can see that your dots trend down to the right. Okay? Carter, you don't need need your laptop. We're doing these all on our foldable. So do this in your foldable with it so you can find our page. Now, identifying the gaps. This is how you're going to identify the gap because Ty circled the area. She's right. I don't write the identifying gap. It's a circled area because as a mathematician, if I'm describing the gaps, I might not be looking at it, but I'm just getting a description. So we identify the gap by the x-axis and the y-axis. So you're going to have two parts. You will say there's a gap between blank and blank on the x-axis. Now, when we look at that gap that we have, and I look at my data points, here's where Ty circled. In order to correctly identify the gap on the x-axis, I look on the left. Here's pretty much that last dot right in here. What point is that on the x-axis? Roughly about, right?
14.
It's roughly 14, 15. If we want to say 14 or 15, it's going to be okay. I'm going to write 15 just because that's one that's actually on there. Okay? So that gap started at 15. Where did that gap end on the x-axis? Yeah, about at the 25 right here. Right with that point. So that one was at 25. That's your first answer on the gap. You're going to look at the x-axis and you're going to say it's between 15 and 25 on the x-axis. You then have to identify where's the gap on the y-axis. So now if I look at this one, hey Rick, let's not, unless you need to move to safety instead. Okay. So if I look at my y-axis now, and I'm looking at where Ty identified my points, I'm going to still look at, okay, where was my gap? Here on the bottom was where it started. So that is about point 25, 24. That dot's a little lower, so I'm going to say about 24. It's probably about 23, 24. But we don't have a specific answer. We don't have to be completely exact. What do you think the high is? It's between 24 and probably 31, 32, because there's that point. Let me use 31 because that's what Zach said. When I described when I identified the gap, and I said between the x-axis and then I described the y-axis, we actually made pretty much like this square. And it tells me for some reason we had this correlation, but there was data missing. For some reason we didn't have an answer there. And that's where I'm going to be like, wait, and I'm going to start questioning, okay, why? Why is it there? Well, maybe it's because of, and we'll get into that in a day or two. All right? All right, let's go back up. Clusters. Anyone know what a cluster is?
No correlation.
It's like where things are kind of together.
Yeah, it's where things are together. We're going to say clusters are isolated groups. We're going to say clusters are isolated groups. It's kind of like he was just saying that it's where there's a bunch of dots together that aren't with the rest of the trend. If I look at this one, we don't want a cluster to just be 2 points. Or really 2 to 3. A cluster should be like 4, 5, or more. So if I look at this graph, do I have a cluster of a bunch of the points that are all grouped together really tight?
Yes.
What?
2 points.
what would be the XY coordinate?
Like 30 and.
So you're saying right here?
Yeah, like right there.
Okay. If you call that a cluster, it would be okay. The problem is, that's only like 2 points, maybe 3. We don't really consider that a cluster. That's just where 2 things happen to be close. If we went by 2 points, we'd have tons and tons of clusters. Remember, clusters want to be like 4 or more. So actually, in this graph, I follow, they're all kind of evenly spaced for the most part. On here, we would say we don't have any gaps.
Do you mean?
Or clusters. I don't know why I wrote gaps. I'm writing the wrong one. We would say no clusters. We don't really have any of the points grouped together. If, I just want you to know how to identify a cluster though, because we will have one on your assignment today. If I was like using his example of the 2 together, what I would do, if we counted this as a cluster, I would say a cluster is, and you just write the coordinate about where it is. There's a cluster around 30, 17. Okay? But for this example, we do not have a cluster. Okay, last one, outlier. We know what outsiders are, right?
Yeah.
Maybe weird people.
Me?
What do you think an outsider is?
It's like a person that
They might have Usually when you consider something an outsider, they don't belong to the original group where the most population is. Doesn't kind of really fit in. So when we do outsiders, that's how we relate to outliers. Outliers are just going to be pairs, our coordinate point, whatever our coordinate point is, or not pairs, I'm going to write points. Points that do not seem to fit in with the other points. Mainly it's a piece of data that does not really seem to fit with the rest of our correlation. If we look at here, here's pretty much where my correlation is. All the points are kind of right together in that geyser being, if you will. Is there a point that sits outside of that?
15 later.
Right here, I notice this one is not with the rest of the group. So we would say our outlier is 15 10. In this example, we have one outlier, and it's at 1510. Okay? Alright, we're really close to being done, then you guys have to do an activity for me today. Okay, today for your homework, I'm going to tell you your homework because you're going to do this activity, and when you're done, you can work on your homework. But, your homework, you are going to go back to yesterday's homework, number 1, 2, and 3. On each one, you made the scatter plot. If you have not, you got to go back and finish it. On each one, you're going to come in here and say, correlation. You're going to look at your scatter plot and tell me what type of correlation is it. Positive, negative, nonlinear, no correlation. You're then going to tell me, are there any gaps? Are there any clusters? Are there any outliers? And that's all you have to do. You're going to do that for each one of them, so you're going to have 3 of them. I'm going to go to number 2, and I'm going to do the same thing. Correlation, gaps, clusters, outliers. Number 3, correlation, gaps, clusters, outliers.
Do we have to? Oh, wait.
I don't think that's really.
Why would you move? No.
Okay, so you're going to identify those 4 parts for each one. The second part, what everyone's going to do, is I'm going to hand out a piece of paper. While I'm handing this paper out, I need you to do one other thing to me. In your notebook, you guys remember we put this in there? I want you to go back to yesterday's homework, the one that we just graded today. You don't really have to put a score because if you did it, you can write a 3. If you didn't, put 0. Circle. Did you get it done on time? Yes or no? And what did you understand or what did you not understand? What do you need help with on yesterday's? Remember, yesterday's was just about graphing the scatter plot, making the scale. I'm going to hand this out and then I'll tell you your activity.
Wait.
Wait, does that mean
Parker, did I give you one already?
No.
Okay. What you're going to do, remember, in your notebook, you were to glue stuff in. In your math notebook, we have scatter plot. That's where this page was that you're filling out right now. On the next page, you were to glue your foldable in. On this next page, you're going to glue this orange sheet in. You're going to work on the activity. You're going to have 15 minutes to be working on it. When you get it done, I want you to raise your hand. And if you have it correct, you'll glue them all in. And I'll give you a sucker, and then you can work on your assignment. If you look at this, I'm going to come around and give you, we have 12 cards. Everyone's going to get 12 cards. If you look at it, it says positive correlation, negative correlation, no correlation. So when I give you this first card, it looks like this. This first one says number of pets a person has and number of books a person reads. Do you think if I was to compare those two sets of data, wait, put your laptop away. I don't want to see you having math anymore. If I look at this, 2 sets of data, how many pets a person has and how many books a person reads, do you think it's going to be a positive correlation, a negative correlation, or no correlation?
Negative correlation.
Probably no correlation.
Ow.
So I want you to put that in there. I'm going to give you the cards. You're going to get 12 cards. Your job is to put them in each column or little row that you think matches with it.
Do we glue it in?
You will glue it in. That is part of your assignment. I'll come around. I'm giving you 12 of these. Yeah, I'm going to bring them out. I'll bring the glue sticks around to your tables for you guys to use. So, once again, your homework is 2 parts. You need to get this stuff glued in, and then you're identifying the correlation of the 3 graphs from homework.